Tony Fauci forced on the vulnerable as an experiment, the hepatitis B vaccine, an experiment where that was injected and transmitted the synthetic gain of function HIV. That's what no one wants you to know. I was 25 years old in 1983, and I didn't know Tony Fauci at all. I just knew he called to try to get a kid to do what was unethical, illegal, and immoral, which was hand them confidential data and let them turn it into a bioweapon.
When you're talking with Mickey in 2019, do you know it's only a matter of time before something hits us like COVID-19?
I did not ever believe that the cover-up and corruption, the pure evil, would go to the fact that you would murder, premeditated murder, 500,000 Americans, 2 million, I don't even know how many. I can't imagine that it would have played out that instead of using the treatments that we had then and there, you would play that scene on the entire population.
Is the population seeing through some of this? Are they educating themselves? Or where are we right now in this fight, Judy?
We're awake now. Every vaccine hurts somebody. If you believe in life, pro-life, you must be pro-choice. No more mandates, no more forcing, no more discrimination. I'm unvaccinated, and that's okay. Nothing that you inject will ever give immunity according to God. Nothing. And that's the point.
The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go?
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is... Hi, it's Brian Rose from London Real. You probably know that we've just recently been re-platformed on YouTube after 25 months completely in the dark. The truth is, I really need your help. What I really need you to do is click on that subscribe button right now, like this video, and maybe even leave a comment or share the link with friends. We're really fighting against an algorithm that's tried to keep us quiet for so long, and the more subscribers we have, the more people watch our content, the better guests we can bring you, the better content, and we can continue transforming lives. We've been doing this for 14 years now. I want to do this for another 14 years, but I really need your help. So click on that subscribe button, like the video, leave a comment, share this, and we're going to continue to bring you more and more great content. Thank you. This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Dr. Judy Mikovits, the molecular biologist, medical researcher, and author. For the past 40 years, you have made it your mission to understand the causes, prevention, and treatment of chronic diseases, and have focused your research on immunology, natural products, chemistry, and epigenetics. You have exposed fraud at the highest levels of healthcare, being the first to speak out against Dr. Anthony Fauci and the heads of both the National Institute of Health and the Center for Disease Control. You are the New York Times bestselling author of Plague, Plague of Corruption, Ending Plague, and the Truth About Masks. Ultimately, you believe that COVID-19 was premeditated murder and that every virus since HIV has been created in a laboratory and spread throughout the population by means of injection or vaccine. Judy, welcome back to London Real.
Well, thanks very much, Brian. That's exactly what I know to be fact.
Fantastic. Wow, Judy, I looked at the dates, and it was just over 3 years ago on May 8th of 2020 when we first had you on this show. And at the time, I couldn't put you live on YouTube because we had just been kind of banned on YouTube, and they were trying to deplatform us. And so we had created our digital freedom platform, and you were like the third guest on that platform. And it was our journey of going deep into all the things that I didn't know we weren't allowed to talk about. Matter of fact, I didn't know that you weren't allowed to say things in this world and that freedom of speech was not a real thing until April 6th of 2020, when we famously had our massive episode kind of deleted and banned. And so just appreciate all the conversations we had. Then after I spoke to you, I met Mickey, and we had the very first pandemic film on, which was, I think, an 18-minute film that was basically about you. And I know you came back on the show to comment on some of the criticisms of that film. And then a couple months ago, I felt like I was full circle, Judy, because we then again premiered Plandemic 3 on our platform, and then I spoke to Mickey and everybody else. And so it's just been a fascinating 3 years. And I was just curious, you were at the premiere in Austin. What does it feel like, Judy, to kind of look back on Plandemic, that was basically you and your story? You were one of the very early people to be speaking all of these truths that probably most people agree most of them are true today, to then watching everything that happened throughout the lockdown and pandemic until now. How did it feel to see all of that?
Well, first of all, it was surreal, because over the previous, let's just say, decade, since I was kidnapped November 18th, 2011, and I don't say arrested anymore because I was actually kidnapped by actors, bad actors, if you will, in police uniform, who tricked the sheriffs here in Ventura. That's the long story of how far it went back. So I was literally silenced that entire decade until Mickey talked to me about then our first book, Plague, and which was the science, the details behind the synthetic, the manufactured, exogenous, they were injected viruses that have been literally, every vaccine, and how the hepatitis B vaccine was how HIV, the first gain of function study, drove this. So Mickey talked to me for more than 6 months in 2019 when we met, as he said, almost 2 years prior to when everything came out. Was when he was talking to me, and we were trying to simply understand each other. So how it felt was surreal, because that somebody was listening. And I still struggle a little bit, because when he showed the first rough cut on February 12th, 2023, February 12th, all I wanted was that he heard me. He was saying, I saw you. And I'm like, no, you heard me. We can all see the injury. We can all see the explosion in chronic disease. We can all see the lies of 40 years of Tony Fauci. For me, 40 years since June 6, 1983, when I first worked for Dr. Frank Rossetti. That first day, it's D-Day. And it's been 40 years in that desert where the data were clear and the government manipulated and corrupted the data at every step of the way in order to drive these pandemics. The hepatitis B vaccine spread HIV through the vulnerable population. It never did cause AIDS. It never was gay-related immune deficiency virus, which Luc Montagnier isolated from the people with the disease, and Frank Rossetti and I confirmed that summer of 1983. So to see all the people until that day, June 3rd, I was literally in a vacuum where I didn't know if people were truly understanding. And that was, the gift of Mickey and Dell and everybody at that showing, who just kind of popped up around the corner and said, hi, Judy. And, before that, I felt like, like I'd been literally erased, and I had been, with looking at the data, and it's not me, it's not my story, it's the facts, 100% proven, 0% debunked, and they continue to do it to this day in the media for how our natural immunity to any of these things, if we protect our mucosal surfaces. What that means is you don't inject anything. Nothing that you inject will ever give immunity, according to God. Nothing. And that's the point.
Yeah, in the Great Awakening, or Plandemic 3, the recent movie, I for the first time, I realized that Mickey had that brother that died of, I don't know if it was AZT or HIV, and that it was AZT, And so I didn't know that's kind of why you initially were talking. And then he said, oh, and then Fauci came up again. He was like, oh, I've heard this name before. And so I forgot how deep this goes. I forgot how long you've known each other. And I think everyone constantly forgets, Judy, how far back it goes, how far back it goes, how far back it goes. And, you know, Dr. David Martin was recently in the EU Parliament here and basically saying, guys, I was telling you this 10 years ago when I was here, and I can track it all the way back into the 50s, 60s when this kind of all started. And it's just, even someone like me that has been privileged enough to speak with incredible people like you know, for the last few years, even I don't realize sometimes how far back it goes, because you get caught up in the facts and then the current pieces and you forget this is a systematic issue. Is that right?
Absolutely. And in fact, that's the key to the whole thing. I was 25 years old in 1983, and I didn't know Tony Fauci at all. I just knew he, Bob Gallo, and Bruce Chabner, you know, called, you know, on purpose when they knew Dr. Rossetti was away to try to get a kid to do what was unethical, illegal, and immoral, which was hand them confidential data that was paid for by the taxpayer, and let them turn it into a bioweapon, which is, you know, exactly as we now know that they did. So Mickey's brother was killed by AZT. His mother, as you see, she was forced because she was in, I don't know whether it was welfare, a program that paid her. And because he was in a vulnerable population, Tony Fauci forced on the vulnerable as an experiment, the hepatitis B vaccine, an experiment where that was injected and transmitted the synthetic gain of function HIV. I did not give the information or the isolate to Tony Fauci that day. And because we know the truth, and it's in Ending Plague, the only time Frank Rossetti and Luc Montagnier had talked, the most censored. It was written it was published August 1st of 2021. And it's been censored for those entire 2 years, because that tells you, not a kid, not a 25-year-old technician who's a natural products chemist who designed the technologies to manufacture these viruses, designed the technology so that they would infect human cells if they were first injected. And hear me, if they were first injected. Never would they have infected a single human being unless you transmitted them through an immune compromised population. That would be a gay man exposed to a lot of pathogens who was being poisoned by a drug. Now we all know that's remdesivir and SARS-CoV-2. SARS-CoV-2, not a coronavirus, a pararetrovirus, 3 parts, HIV, XMRV, and SARS. And this is what David Martin relayed so perfectly. Yeah, they did the coronas at North Carolina. They did the retros at Fort Detrick, and I did every one of the cultures and manufacture procedures. It's all in Ending Plague. How they tried in 1982 to force me to manufacture in an open air centrifuge, the first and deadliest, the only natural it's not natural, it comes from the 1600s from eating cats, human T-cell leukemia virus 1. And you can see that virus in its codons, its bioweapon, in the injuries that we're seeing. I say, Maddie DeGarry, the injuries we're seeing in the clinical trials. Those were trials intended to kill, and it is and remains premeditated murder. And I made that statement. You killed everyone you injured and caused this explosion in chronic disease that our economy can't afford. So the useless eaters, once their experiments were finished, all you had to do was kill the victims. And we know that. And it's beyond a shadow of a doubt. I've got the data. We've got the data. That's the end of the book, Plague of Corruption. It was Mickey that probably saved all of humanity, as he explained to me what a dead man's trigger is. Because the book ended with the way forward, because I thought we could all play kumbaya and understand we cured this in the 1980s. that we didn't have to poison the people. We didn't have to discriminate against the people. All we had to do was understand God-given immune systems for different populations according to their environment and the expression. That's why my PhD, epigenetics. It's not the presence, it's the expression. So he told me what a dead man's trigger is. So I called Kent Heckin Lively and said, maybe there's one last story I should tell you. Because what do we have? Every single thing the taxpayers paid for, proof of every one of my words. And they knew this. They knew this in 2019. That book, Plague of Corruption, was held up from publication, and I'm choosing to believe that was God, so that we could play this story out from, October of 2019 until we had, November of 2019, a little Johns Hopkins Event 201. When you know the history, that's why you know the censorship. No book more censored than Ending Plague, so much so that the real Anthony Fauci came out without a word in it because it's been so censored. That's what no one wants you to know.
And Judy, when you're talking with Mickey in 2019, do you know that something's happening soon in 2020 or 2021? Do you know it's only a matter of time before something hits us like COVID-19 because of all the history that you know? Or where are you feeling? And when it all starts to play out and you're watching it happen in 20 and 21, what are you thinking? Are you thinking, okay, this happened slightly different than I thought it would. The people are reacting differently than I thought it would. What was it like for you to watch it play out like in slow motion?
I did not ever believe that the cover-up and corruption, the pure evil, would go to the fact that you would murder, premeditated murder, and now we know the counts from Ed Dowd and others, 500,000 Americans. I got 2 million, I don't even know how many. I can't imagine that it would have played out, that instead of using the treatments that we had then and there, you would play that scene on the entire population, not just gay men. We knew the history of Tony Fauci. If you saw any of the ugliness of Tony Fauci, we knew it from ACT UP. We got the laws in ACT UP. No, it never occurred to me. We talked to him. I talked to him, like I said, a solid year. Our books were all written. The data was all there. When our first book was written, that was my legal defense. Every word of it was written as a declaration turned into an affidavit. The entire Ninth Circuit Court here in the U.S., the lawyers, the FBI, the DOJ had every piece of that data, those data, since May of 2014. And you know what they did? They didn't help everyone. They created the bioweapon of all time, COVID-19 vaccine. SARS-CoV-2, the virus, was created in 2005 and published. And the monkey virus, the SIV, XMRV, murine leukemia virus, and the SARS wasn't enough because it wouldn't infect people and it wouldn't kill people if their mucosal immunity was straight. So I never believed they would create a bioweapon and inject the deadliest spike protein of all time when every bit of our work for 40 years said you don't need infectious virus to create disease. Since 1980, we knew the spike, the envelope, the surface unit alone of these viruses was the deadly component. So they cloned the deadly parts of the 1918 Spanish flu, the 1918 pandemic strain of influenza A. This was never about SARS-CoV-2, which had been injected in every polio vaccine since 2005 when it was published. Hear me. This was about, and this is John Cullen's work as he talked to me in September of 2021 on Jason Goodman's show, September 25th. John Cullen told us it was all about the influenza that was injected, just as Tony Fauci promised President Trump, or promised the American people on 60 Minutes the Sunday before the 2016 election. Promised, you'll see, it was always influenza. 4,000 deaths a week starting in January of 2020. It was, and all covered up. And now doctors actually believe the lie that we stopped influenza. Oh, we stopped the flu thanks to the masks. And we're going back there again if people don't understand this. So every word was true. How did I feel? Not for a second. And to this day, I struggle with it. I could not believe they would simply murder millions of innocent people, including my husband, and deny, and perpetrate a lie when we have absolute proof, as we know from Ryan Cole, everybody's work, that it was the shot that caused the deaths we're seeing now, that Ed Dowd's reporting, that everybody's reporting. They murdered more millennials than the entire 10-year Vietnam War. 25 to 44. This is Ed Dowd's work in his book. So for me, it's still horrific, and it won't end until we, the people, stop it and make sure it never happens again. And that's not happening. So I don't have a great deal of faith. Our Congress still plays the China virus game. You know, at what point our FDA still murders people every day? There is no approved drug. They're experimenting on you. The commercials are fraud. They're experimenting on you, and they know it, and with everything. And this was on the high wire, and Del Bigtree, I just love Del Bigtree and Jeffrey Jackson reporting yesterday, Ozempic, all these commercials. So now you created this disease, this explosion of cancer, chronic inflammatory disease. COVID is not a disease, as David Martin said in the very beginning. It's a collection of inflammatory disease. And what we knew from my PhD thesis and beyond, November 14th, 1991, you do not inject anyone with an HIV infection. You just injected HIV, GP120, Borrelia. There's no such thing as chronic Lyme disease. That is and always was right in the G protein, purinergic modulator, the G protein, ivermectin, right in the middle of GP120. And they covered it up. They changed the name. They changed the language in the data. The literature, the clinical literature, is criminal fraud, not the basic.
And Judy, let me ask you, do you believe that the virus was leaked from a lab in Wuhan?
I don't believe it was leaked. I believe it was shipped from Fort Detrick. So you just mentioned May 8th when we talked. On April 8th, 1st, Joshua Phillips in Epoch Times aired a very long documentary that two of us did, Ted Fogarty, a radiation expert, and me with American Media Periscopes, now James Grunvig. We in February of 2020, we interviewed with the Epoch Times all day long, literally for 12 hours. And that film was aired first. It looks like Wuhan in the background on April 8th of 2020. Again, the book is in press, the movie's in press, Plandemic. It'd been in press for a long time, and the government knew it, every word of it. And so on that show, and I hope you'll find the clip, or I know perhaps my tech wizards will find it for me. On that show, you couldn't cut my words quick enough when I said Tony Fauci in Fort Detrick, when we weren't allowed to do it at the biosafety level 4, as we had since the 1980s. Again, it was never a mistake, whether Dr. Bridle in Canada or anybody else. We knew the spike alone in 1980 would cause disease. We knew in 1980, if injected, I'm going to keep saying 1980, we knew it. It's in ending plague. And what did we do? We injected them. So in that movie, you can see, and I love the editors because you know how fast I talk, and they cut my words before I said Fauci and Fort Detrick and the biomedical complex. At the end, that biosafety level 4 was built somewhere around 2015 when Tony Fauci and I showed the 2015 paper where he funded it. They shipped the virus in little vials. That's how you do it. And they didn't just ship them to Wuhan. They shipped them around the world, and then they manufactured it in fermenters. That's how you do it in the cell line called Vero E6. It's a clone of the monkey kidney cell line that manufactures where you produce. And that's why I just mentioned I was fired in 1982. They actually called it a reduction in force when Ronald Reagan promised that he'd reduce the size of the federal government. The story's all in Ending Plague. So what they made us was all hired guns and contractors, meaning you're not an independent investigators. You do as you're told or you lose your job. Well, I lost my job because I'll never do as I'm told when it's unethical, illegal, immoral, and people are going to die. We have to stand firm on the word. Well, that paper and that show, that 2015 paper, showed you the isolates in the cell line, shipped to Wuhan, shipped to Italy, along with the Maiden Darby kidney cell line harboring the deadliest influenza from the pandemic strain. That paper was also published in 2004. So since 2005, SARS-CoV-2 has been injected in every single polio vaccine. And they knew it. They were getting caught. As I said, premeditated murder. They got caught by the Informed Consent Action Network, Brian Hooker, Heroes, Bobby Kennedy, the foreword of our book, Heroes, Suzanne Humphreys, Luc Montagnier, Frank Rossetti, who never stopped, Jeff Bradstreet, who lost their lives because we could treat these kids. 2015, a publication of Suramin, another purinergic modulator, gave kids back their voice when used appropriately. What did Bayer Monsanto do? They ended the trial and stopped it. Double-blind, placebo-controlled. Kids got their life back. When you see that, all you know is pure evil. They mimic the Fort Detrick biosafety level 4 at USAMRIID, U.S. Army Military Research Institute Infectious Disease. They shipped it and manufactured the cell lines.
And when it comes to COVID, in the late 19, was it leaked from Wuhan? Is that how that happened there? And was that intentional, do you think, or was that accidental?
No, it was shipped and manufactured and injected in polio shots. It's not leaked. Okay. COVID is not a disease.
So it didn't happen. It didn't start in Wuhan.
SARS-CoV-2.
It didn't
Correct.
actually.
It was shipped there.
It was shipped there back in 15. And then How did it get out of the lab and into people?
You manufacture it in an open air centrifuge and you inject it in every polio vaccine. Okay. They injected SARS-CoV-2, which never caused COVID. We've got to get the language right. COVID was a covert operation to cover up and murder. That's what it was, a military operation. As David Martin said in Plandemic Indoctrination, COVID is not a disease. It's a collection of injuries from vaccines injected. How it got in people since 2004, SARS-CoV-2 was injected. That's how you get the PCR test to amplify it. Human beings keep it latent. It didn't cause anything. There's no such thing as asymptomatic disease. There never was a disease.
Okay, so nothing started in Wuhan and nothing came across then to American Italy. It was always everywhere. And then when it came out, they called it COVID, and then you saw the response.
It was always shipped in little vials, 10 million cells, that were amplified, manufactured, and injected and caused vaccines. Absolutely. It wasn't released into the air with the pangolin. It wasn't released in a seafood market. It didn't go through the air. That's not how retroviruses work. It absolutely never was. The whole thing is a lie in every single country, including Italy. They sent along the flu vaccine and the Maiden Darby. It's a dog kidney cell line. When you understand how these things are manufactured, all we, the people, have to do is never again inject anything. And I can hand you the cell lines they shipped. That's the point of the last chapter of Plague of Corruption. We have them all in the freezer, and the government knew that. Did they come out of the Ninth Circuit Court? Where'd you ship them from? Where'd you ship them from? Fort Detrick, or maybe that military facility in Wimber, Pennsylvania?
Okay.
Which secret covert place did they ship?
And then they refused to they refused to prescribe all of this simple medication that could have treated these symptoms, and that led to a lot of deaths. And they did that in order to then bring in the vaccine, which we can talk about. But you're saying there were
just as ADT. That's exactly the game plan is AZT.
Right. Okay, gotcha. And then they bring this new drug that's actually more damaging, and that's exactly what happened here. Some of those things that could have saved a lot of people in 2020 were these basic drugs that had been around for a long time, and yet those were not allowed to be used because then you couldn't justify the vaccine. Is that why those were basically not?
Well, absolutely, and because they heal the disease at essentially no cost. The same thing is true
Ivermectin
of
and
AIDS and cancer. Well, not just ivermectin, Paximune, type 1 interferon, peptide T, the subject of the Dallas Buyers Club, cannabis, the solutions, the HBOT, hyperbaric oxygen, everything that was in Ending Plague. This is what Peter Duesberg and everybody said all along. HIV never caused AIDS. So it was there, and didn't mean AIDS didn't exist, because that's a dysregulated immune system. That's a cytokine storm. The cytokine storms are the same. The immune system is being crippled. And that's what they just did. They crippled the immune system of million Americans who now, and tens of millions of people worldwide, who now can't regulate their innate immune responses. And if one other injection is given ever, you're just going to continue to see these deaths, as we're seeing with kids dying suddenly. So it has to end. Do we have oral immunization strategies? Do we have all those drugs in our arsenal that the taxpayers paid for? There's so much in the freezer. Oh, a couple of Regeneron antibodies that went straight back to Ebola. Do you realize, even though 21,000 people were murdered by Fauci and Obama's cover-up of the 2014 confession of William Thompson. If you inject little black boys with MMR, 3 RNA viruses in a single shot with all the contaminants of the monkey cells, if you inject them before the age of 3, black boys have 2 to 4 times the risk of developing autism, neuroimmune diseases, cancers, COVID, if they're given any MMR, live viral vaccine, because they're live, because you grow them in those cell lines and you inject them, and you can't kill the cell line, and you can clear the cellular mRNA, the monkey, mouse, all the other that is in those cell lines that have been gathered since we've had them manufactured since 1960s. Since 1960s, we just keep adding pathogens to these cell lines, and they're all in my freezers. So not only ivermectin, not only Suramin, not only peptide T, not only cannabis, not only HBOT, but the combined therapies. No bioweapon formed against us will hurt us if we all realize not another shot, not another drug that is poison, that is advertised on TV. So what did they do after they caused all the inflammatory diseases called COPD? They blamed you for your cigarette smoking, which it is not. They blamed you. It's an inflammatory disease. And they took budesonide, Pulmicort, Richard Bartlett. One of the people I saw at Pandemic 3 that surprised me. It's like, it's like, hi, Judy, from every corner. And it's like, okay, Richard Bartlett, budesonideworks.com, Pulmicort in a store that you can buy. What did they do? They took budesonide and made it part of a 3-point toxic drug, just as Paxlovid is ivermectin with toxic fluoride, and remdesivir is ivermectin with toxic fluoride and cyanide. They knew exactly what they're doing, and that's what they did at the end of HIV when everybody caught them. But I guarantee you, Magic Johnson and the rich and the people that could afford weren't injected with anything else. No, only the poor, only the children, only the medical racism. Okay. And that's what I'm never going to stop fighting. Okay. So it's around mid-2020 now, and we're being, all these other, like you said, very cheap, effective drugs are being vilified in the media. We're being told to, obviously, masks and all these other things, and we're being told the vaccine's coming. And so I want to just tell you something that happened to me, Judy. I had Bobby Kennedy on my show. Again, I had to have him on the Digital Freedom Platform because I couldn't have him on YouTube. And I walked into that interview with my science and engineering background, Judy. So I got a degree from MIT. I graduated in '93, and I was always the science kid.
And so I was a bit, and now that I look back, Judy, and I know a lot of people are, I was struck by scientism to a certain extent. I fell in love with the beauty of the science, and so I was all in on the science. And so in my first interview here with David Icke in March of 2020, I said, look, this is what's happening outside, and I guess what, I'm ready to get the vaccine, because I know science works. And I started my conversation with Bobby, and I'm telling you, Judy, 40 minutes in, he convinced me to rethink that entirely. Once he explained to me that it's not the science he's talking about, they hijacked the science and they now use it for their own means. And because of the lack of liability in the entire history, I then became really skeptical about everything. But it showed me, Judy, how many people just blindly follow the science, and somehow, because the science is simple and pure, you never look at what's actually happening with the science. Maybe you can talk about that, Judy, because you must see people literally blinded by the science sometimes. And it happened to me, and I think it happened to a lot of people, which is why they just went head first, give me the vaccine, etc. Can you speak on that before we get to the vaccine?
Sure. Well, first of all, it's not blinded by the science. It's blinded by the scientism. It's a cult. Because what did they do to me after, the movie? What did I say? No mRNA vaccine, no viral vaccine ever worked. What does the word work mean? Lifelong immunity according to God. You don't need a booster of God. Your immune system does that. But it's actually a fabulous story with Bobby, and what brilliant, I'll be forever grateful and humbled by that man, because in 2019, the foreword had been drafted. The book was in press in maybe October for sure. And I can show you the book's coming out, and the date got moved back. At one point in early October, I emailed Bobby and said, Bobby, how can I help? Or maybe late summer, I said, how can I help? And he said, Judy, there's something missing. And I said, I know, Bobby. I know you're busy. Read the last chapter. Remember, I just told you the book, the last chapter, was the way forward until Mickey Willis. And so when he told me the dead man's trigger and what that meant, I called Ken Heckenlively and said, maybe there's one last story I should tell you. We saved all the evidence. So I said, Bobby, I know you're busy. Read the last chapter. And he called me up in a couple of days. I was in the car with my husband driving in LA. And I went like this to my husband because I saw Bobby come up on the screen of the audio phone. And I said, hey, Bobby, what's up? And he said, Judy, and he said, I just read the whole thing, and oh my God, it's brilliant. Congratulations. I said, don't congratulate me. Ken Heckenlively wrote it. And he literally hung up. And 5 seconds later, Ken Heckenlively called up and said, he gets it. And then he came out with that beautiful foreword. It's not a foreword, it's 34 pages. And he went back through the corruption in the vaccine program for the entire 40 years, from the chicken pox. I mean, it was just, and most of it I didn't even know, because I'm that National Cancer Institute AIDS person. I make immunotherapies. I don't make bioweapons. That's what I've done my whole life. So that's what I validate. Just brilliant. And again, he wrote it in a couple of weeks, and he handwrites everything. And all he got wrong was when I joined, who I was, because the lies is that, I didn't join the National Cancer Institute in 1980. I didn't work for Frank Rossetti in 1983. So when you look at the scientism, the cult, they never showed you data. I always show you data, and I can prove every word I say and everything. That's why pandemic is 100% fact and 0% debunked. Debunked isn't disproven. Debunked is a political word. It's scientism word. It's about people. It's about making sure nobody listens to my voice. So I was hugely disappointed by the American people's ignorance, but it's not their fault, because every doctor, any doctor, anywhere, who didn't know a class of drugs called purinergic modulators, of which only 2 of hundreds including some that will stop clots from forming on stents, on cardiovascular stents. The drugs were started in the class of drugs, purinergic modulators, ivermectin, ivermectin, and Suramin, 1972. That's why I made those drugs. I made drugs from natural products to heal people. We have all the cures to all of this, and the taxpayers paid for it. You can have everything for less than $200 a month in botanical nutritional support. And what did the FDA do? Nothing. Nothing. Those drugs were never approved, even though we presented them in 2008, 2016, a platform, as I just kept working no matter what, the corruption was, as you see the injury. So this is, Bobby's absolutely brilliant, and we do our homework. He does his homework. I rarely talk to him, but when he calls me, he says, Judy, blah, 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 blah. And I said, yes. And he says, send me the paper. Send me the data. I never send him anything that's not data. He's got that entire hard drive I handed to the FBI, the DOJ, and the Ninth Circuit Court. Frank Rossetti and I in an 8-hour tape conversation, maybe 4 or 5 hours, with an FBI agent here in Ventura, California, May of 2014. The DOJ did this. This was the weaponization and the murder of millions to drive a cult called Scientism. Never had anything to do with science. It's a cult. You obey us or you die. You obey us or you don't work. You obey us. You Christians. No, we're one nation under God. You Nation of Islam. No, we're one nation under God. I thank God for Tony Muhammad and the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, because they called us. Bobby, me, Jack Lyons-Weiler, Dr. Noah Schwinder, December 18th, 2020. And all he asked us, and we went to Chicago, and he said, based on the data, not what you think, Judy, or doctors, anybody else, and said, should I recommend this for my people, the Nation of Islam? At the end of the day, he heard the data and he resuscitated it back as you sit there right now. People were writing for him, but he said from his mind, I get it. It's not the presence. It's the expression. We can silence it. No vaccines for the Nation of Islam. Thank God.
Wow, that's a powerful story. What do you mean by the dead man's last calling? Is that what
Dead man's trigger?
Yeah, what is that?
It's when the book just said the way forward, because I'm that person that thinks we're all kumbaya and we can fix it and scientists will turn around. It means you put on a flak jacket. So the doctor that introduced me to Mickey Willis, it's in the book, Dr. Lori, who introduced me to Mickey Willis and forced us to sit down and talk to each other. Well, we didn't have anything to say. Because he didn't understand me and I don't know anything about film, which is obvious. But when she said, you can't publish this book, it doesn't have a dead man's trigger. And I don't know what that is. So I look at Mickey and he explains it's if a person has the control that will bomb the entire world. If you have the flak jacket and you'll blow it all up. If your finger comes off the trigger, the world blows up. So if they shoot you, if they do anything, and your autonomic response removes from the trigger, the world blows up. Well, the trigger is the last chapter. We have all the data in freezers on hard drives. Bobby has it. Many people have it. Del Bigtree has it. The Ninth Circuit Court has had it since May of 2004. Since 2017, when we showed Jason Chavez, March 31st, when he was then House, I guess, whatever is the people who are supposed to investigate. Same crew, Del Bigtree, Bobby Kennedy, Vile, Michelle Ford, Congress people, the late Dr. Tony Bark. We all went to Congress and presented at the Washington Press Club on March 31st, 2017, sat in Jason Chavez's office, and he promised, with literally the data in our hand, and he had it, do something. You know what he did? He quit. That's what he did. Because I know who gets threatened, so I don't have a lot of love for the people who won't stand up and put on their big girl pants and stand up for the American people. They just quit and make money on TV, and I won't play that game.
Okay. All right, so we're kind of mid-2020. I just had this conversation with Bobby, and I'm starting to, be able to talk to people like you and people all throughout, and I'm really starting to wonder how you're going to rush through this vaccine. And for me, it just seems like the most ridiculous thing. And I remember I just spoke with Dr. Jay Bhattacharya a couple weeks ago, and he had released the Great Barrington Declaration. And I was walking around London and it was vacant. And it was really frustrating me because I knew taxi drivers and pub owners, and they were like literally dying and struggling with mental health because everything was going down. That's why I later ran for mayor of London, because the mayor was making all the wrong choices. And I had Dr. Martin Kulldorff of Harvard on the show back in 2020. And at the end of the show, I asked him about the vaccine. And the Great Barrington Declaration people didn't have comments at that time on the vaccine. And I said, Martin, does it make sense to you that we're going to rush through this experiment, perhaps the greatest experiment ever performed on humanity, to billions of people, to something that hasn't been tested, hasn't been studied? And he just sat there and he said, that sounds like a really bad idea. And then we watched it all happen. And I'm just wondering, when you watched it all happen, Judy, towards, I guess that's end of 20 and then 21, what did you see happening? And yeah, what surprised you and then didn't surprise you about people not questioning it, about what the big companies ended up doing?
Well, nothing surprised me because we lived it in HIV/AIDS. So by that time, I saw the Washington Post on May 8th go after me. So again, lying about who I was, lying about the disease, driving it away from AIDS and AZT and what we did to the gay community, what Fauci did to the gay community, what we as people did to the gay community. Oh, that's not me. I don't have to worry, but that's not my behavior. That's an abomination to God. Therefore, they deserve it. That's not who we are as people. We don't play God. Only God plays God. And at the end of the day, all I did was what we did in 1983. I just set up the Dallas Buyers Club, bought in all the drugs, took everything out of my freezers and made sure everybody I could. I drove that stuff up and down the street and people were coming to my door and around the world. And I just kept talking, went to Clay Clark, anybody who would listen, gave them everything, handed them.
To continue watching the rest of the episode for free, visit our website, londonreal.tv, or click the link in the description below.
Most people will never see this opportunity. Dubai luxury transformation projects have historically delivered 40 to 90% annual returns. That is incredible. These were once reserved only for insiders with access. I spent 15 years on Wall Street and I learned this: the biggest returns always go to the people who get the call first. Now, you finally can. We've just received a brand new project with major upside potential. Allocations move fast. Click the link, apply now, and speak to my team. This is your chance to see what others never will.